while people are settling in, we have a riveting plenary session, which is a deep, deep dive into the future of advanced therapies. It will be chaired by Anshul Mangal, President of Project Farma and Precision Advanced, and yes, if you were paying attention, one of our newly elected members of the board of directors. Anshul, congratulations. Phil Serrer, Senior Vice President, Precision Value and Health. Derek Hicks, Chief Business Officer at Intellia Therapeutics. Ann Lee, Chief Technical Officer at Prime Medicine. Bob Smith, Senior Vice President, Global Gene Therapy Business at Pfizer. And Sumit Verma, Senior Vice President, Global Strategic Manufacturing at Iovance. So with that, Anshul, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you for having us today. As Tim mentioned, my name is Anshul Mangal. I'm the president of Project Farma and Precision Advanced. It's a pleasure to moderate today's panel. Precision Advanced is uniquely focused on the complexities of clinical, regulatory, manufacturing, and commercial needs that are needed to bring an advanced therapy to market. On today's panel, we're going to hear from all the experts on the panel today on these complexities. They're going to give us an insight into their respective companies, share their expectations for 2024, and tell us a little bit about what they're excited about the upcoming year. So with that, I'd love to get started by learning about each one of your respective companies and what's next for each one of them with respect to cell and gene therapies. So Anne, would love to start with you. Prime Medicine uses a unique prime editing platform, a next-generation gene editing approach to address the genetic causes of disease and potentially provide patients with long-lasting cures. Can you tell us a little bit more about Prime and what's next for the company?
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here. Good morning, everyone. Prime Medicine really aims to deliver a new class of differentiated one-time curative therapies for patients. And we use a gene editing technique that's really powerful. We think about it as a DNA word processor where you actually can search and then replace the genetic mutations to really correct the DNA to resolve the disease. One of the key features is that it's highly versatile. It's the only gene therapy. It's the only genetic therapy. It's the only genetic editing technology that can, address all mutations. It can address transitions, transversions, insertions, deletions, and finally, it's got really, really broad breadth. And I think that overall breadth actually is shown in our pipeline. We've got a pipeline of 18 different programs, and they basically are kind of like in two different buckets. The first bucket are those programs that really, I think, are the fastest or most direct approach to treating patients. These programs literally, they're serious diseases, the mutations are well understood, we have a regulatory pathway, and I think the delivery technologies have been, or similar to delivery technology, has been clinically validated. And so we actually work on 3 different types of modalities. We have ex vivo autologous cells where we're using HSCs and we use electroporation for the delivery of the gene delivery. We also have LNP to the liver, delivering the cargo, and then also AAV to eye and ear. But then we also have a second bucket of programs, and these really represent highly differentiated diseases approaches where we really where no other gene editing technology can really address these. And so these really, we think about them as like the repeat expansion diseases, Friedreich's ataxia, Huntington's, ALS. There's a whole slew of them, and so we're really bringing those programs forward as well. Now, you asked the question, what can we look forward to next year? We're actually really excited, or later on this year, we're really excited because we're actually transitioning from a preclinical company to a clinical company next year. We intend to file an IND, our first IND next year, by the end of next year. That's for our chronic granulomatous disease program. That's an ex vivo autologous cell therapy where we use the electroporation. That program right now, we're in the process of carrying out IND-enabling studies, generating all the data that's needed for the IND. So that's actually lots of work and really exciting. And then we also focus on generating the proof of concept data for the delivery to in vivo animals, small and large animals. So we expect to be able to share that data soon. And we continue to expand the overall application of prime editing.
Thank you, Ann. It's really exciting. Bob, as the SVP for the global gene therapy business at Pfizer, can you discuss Pfizer's focus on advanced therapies and how it's evolving?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the panel. Really happy to be here, and very pleased to hear about the great progress that you and the team at Prime are developing. I would say we've been investing in gene therapy for the last 10 years. I kind of think of myself as employee number one at Pfizer in our gene therapy business. I literally was number one. I never thought I'd be in this role for 10 years, and I look back at it and was reflecting on the remarks from Devin and Tim, like 10 years ago, where the field was versus where it is today is really quite remarkable. And the evolution of our business, we were primarily focused on recombinant AAV when we started investing in this space, using a strategy of we described as build, buy, and partner. And I'd like to acknowledge Derek was one of my business development colleagues at Pfizer that was involved in some of those early transactions when we started to build our pipeline. We now have 3 programs in very late stage. We're not going to be part of the class of 2023 approvals. We hopefully will be part of the class of 2024 approvals for all 3 of them. And we're really excited about the potential of those programs. And what we've done over the last several years is expanded kind of the thinking about gene therapy to be a much broader umbrella of genetic medicine. And you think about the nature of the technologies, they're evolving so fast that a lot of the technologies that we thought were true and reliable, have limitations. Like any technology platform, there's a certain set of inherent advantages and a certain set of inherent weaknesses or limitations. And what we try to do is kind of build a genetic toolbox. So we've expanded beyond just, I call classical recombinant AAV, into messenger RNA, gene editing, base editing, a lot of work now thinking about epigenetic approaches and using that toolbox in ways where they can address diseases where you have a loss of function and also address diseases where you have a gain of dysfunction. And these different approaches really need to be customized for the nature of the disease etiology. And the other area that we're thinking about quite a bit is where do we go beyond rare monogenic diseases into more prevalent diseases with larger patient populations, and then thinking about the relative benefit risk profile that drives some of the investment decisions that we're making, because a lot of these therapies that we're developing, to the analogy of a transplant, to a certain extent they're unreversible. So you really need to think through not just the biology of the disease, but the clinical development framework, the regulatory endpoints, and what are patients and their caregivers going to be willing to do in terms of a benefit risk profile. So that's a little bit of what we've been doing. We've also built out now a gene therapy CDMO initiative with our Pfizer Center 1. We're building out what we call Pfizer Ignite, which is a kind of novel, innovative way to interact with the broader ecosystem in providing genetic medicine tools to our potential partners. And we're also created within Pfizer now, beyond our Gene Therapy Center of Excellence, which I was involved in creating, we've now created an RNA-focused Center of Excellence. And we're pursuing a lot of public-private partnerships to expand the space, notably the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium, which ARM is a member of. So, lots of interesting things that are going on, but our real primary focus is to enter these 3 programs into the class of 2024.
Thank you, Bob. Speaking of the class of 2024, Sumit, can you provide us some insight into Iovance Biotherapeutics and it's using its T-cell-based immunotherapy technology platform to recognize, attack, and kill cancer cells?
Sure. Bob, lots of commonalities here. Yeah. I'm also employee number 1 for Iovance Biotherapeutics in the commercial manufacturing space, and certainly, just like you, we're looking forward to being part of class of 2024 next year with our cell therapy. Just a bit of background on Iovance Biotherapeutics. We aim to be the leader in innovating, developing, and delivering TIL therapies. This is a one-of-a-kind treatment for various forms of cancer that utilizes the body's own immune system to treat, utilizing targeted infiltrated lymphocytes. So we've been treating this across various platforms, almost 600 patients so far, and we're very fortunate to have received the RMAT designation in 2018. So our teams have been working through quite a few different platforms right now for both monotherapy and combination products. So our lead candidate is metastatic melanoma, which we got our BLA filing and have gone through a lot of vigorous approval processes with the FDA. Just now we're at the inches waiting for the approval. But it's certainly been a great journey, and our teams are focused on the next platforms. We worked on treatments ranging from small cell lung cancer to combination products. That's a big focus of ours. And we kicked off one of our largest clinical trials for Tilvance. Tilvance is a combination with pembrolizumab and TIL. So we're looking and getting excited about bringing it in the early stages. Lastly, our teams have been focused on establishing a manufacturing footprint. We built a very big facility in Philadelphia, heavily focused on bringing this personalized therapy to the number of patients that we need to serve. Just thinking about melanoma, in the US itself, there are about 8,000 deaths that are occurring. If you put in small cell lung cancer, that's about 250,000. So that's precision medicine, and the demand for manufacturing supply is very critical. Not only do you have to partner and establish great external CDMOs, but you have to have in-house capabilities to achieve those goals. So our teams have certainly got a lot of excitement post-approval to get things going.
Thanks, Sumit. Derek, we saw a pretty heartfelt video earlier about gene editing, and obviously Intellia has been a pioneer in the development of CRISPR-Cas9 genomic editing and is rapidly moving its therapies through the clinic. I'd love to provide us an update on Intellia and all of its great innovative medicines that it's developing.
Yeah, sure, happy to do so. Excuse me, and good morning, everyone, and happy to be on this panel. Look forward to the discussion. So I'll talk about Intellia in three components. So, first of all, we're a modular platform company, right? And I think we have multiple gene editing tools. So, we have a base editor, we have, our DNA writer that we acquired a year or so ago from a company called Rewrite. So we have a very modular platform that we can apply to different approaches. So that's our platform. And then we have our ex vivo side and we have our in vivo side as well too. On the ex vivo side, we believe we have a best-in-class allogeneic platform that we can apply to oncology targets as well as to autoimmune, which may be something that we discuss in a little bit. And then on the in vivo side, to your point in being a leader in the space, we have two assets that are currently in the clinic. We have one asset for cardiomyopathy and polyneuropathy, and then we also have an asset in the clinic as well for hereditary angioedema that we view as a functional cure. So we've made excellent progress, and we're very excited about that progress. I think the one thing that we're also excited about is because our toolbox is so broad, it keeps our research team very, very busy. And we also welcome partnerships, and we think that's a way to move the space forward because there's so much that we can do, and we have so limited resources, which again, I'm sure is a topic that we'll talk about. But it's a very exciting place to be. I'm not employee number one. I'm probably employee 400 to 500, but it's been a very exciting ride, and I certainly look forward to what we continue to do as a company. I think you'll see a lot from us over the coming year or so.
Awesome. Thank you. Phil talked about collaborations and partnerships, and I gave a little brief introduction on Precision earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about Precision, how it's working and collaborating with folks on the panel today to develop therapies for patients?
Absolutely, Anshul. Pleasure to be here with everyone and everyone on the panel. For the last 12, 13 years, Precision's been working in a very holistic way with some of the folks on the panel here. We're rather unique in the sense that we can provide laboratories through our laboratories. We do a lot of custom assay work. We have a contract research organization that's very specific to oncology and rare disease, which is great for cell and gene therapy and advanced therapies. We were pioneers in building some of the first manufacturing facilities. And we also have commercialization services that kind of work to establish and quantify the value. You heard Tim Hunt talk about that. That's some of the types of work that we do. What makes Precision, I think, unique is that we do this in a very interconnected way. So I'm an old lab person who somehow morphed into a health economist for some reason. And in doing so, I'm brought into when we're designing clinical trials or when we're thinking about assays to think about how do we measure upfront some of the pieces of value. Our laboratory folks who are developing NAB and TAB assays are brought into our clinical research teams as we're designing it, also brought into when we're thinking about manufacturing. So this interconnectedness that we've created, I think helps in speeding up the R&D process, but also in potentially optimizing the value and how we approach values with payers and health technology assessments, with the ultimate goal of reducing those burdens and those hurdles to get these products to patients, which is what we're all here for.
Thanks, Phil. As Tim indicated earlier, there's been some amazing achievements in 2023, leaving us really excited for what's upcoming in 2024. We saw earlier that there may be a record number of 8 gene and cell therapy approvals by the end of 2023, and we may start to hit that mark that the FDA projected for 10 to 20 approvals by the year 2025. So let's talk about next year and what's upcoming in the next year. Sumit, would love to start with you. What would you say are some of your top technologies that are poised to disrupt or advance cell and gene therapies next year?
Yeah, I think my colleagues here will speak a lot about gene editing. I think that's a big platform for next year to be on the lookout. I'll focus towards the manufacturing and supply chain side. I think as we have started hearing a lot of allogeneic work being done and CAR-T having that success rate, I think that's going to be a big transformation for the industry. Certainly, autologous cell therapy has its place, very good personalized, and ultimately super challenging from a logistics side. For the patient's benefit, being able to manufacture in a batch and serve a multitude of patients first time right is a key concept that I think we're going to see a lot more maturity next year. The other piece is around the disruption with automation. We're already seeing some very successful stories. The work that Solaris and team are doing from a cell therapy in a box to looking at how do we utilize the information from an AI perspective, whether it's predictive for clinical trials to simply some of the things that Tim touched on, trying to make batch processing and automation into our overall manufacturing that helps reduce cost of goods and, more importantly, gets that efficiency and reduces takt time. So to me, that's going to be a big piece that we see in 2024. And from just a perspective of how we partner with patient care side, I expect to see a lot more collaborations with the ATCs, the authorized treatment centers, where CAR-T has been really good about establishing that network and now harnessing that initial network to the next level where patients can start benefiting from all these clinical supplies and ideally commercial product at a much faster rate than it's been, because so far we've been focused on the large cancer centers, the Cleveland Clinics, City of Hope and such. And now that we've got these centers across the US especially, I see that transforming to getting access to patients much, much faster over the next year.
And Derek, what do you think are some of the top technologies for next year that you're excited about?
I think, I talked a little bit about the prime editing, and it really is very, very broad. I mean, Derek, you were mentioning, but it's the same with us in the sense that one technology I hadn't actually talked about, we are right now focused on rare diseases, but we can actually use prime editing for cell therapies as well. For example, we use this technology version of prime editing called PASSAGE, which is prime-assisted site-specific integrase gene editing. And basically, we can establish a allogeneic platform by using the prime editing PASSAGE to knock out or to accurately place a CAR right into the track locus, and then because prime editing is so gentle, you can actually use multiplexing and knock out the B2M gene. So I think that is something that, we've demonstrated that. I think, one of the challenges for us is that we really have a wealth of too many programs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so many opportunities. And in fact, I think we're really committed to trying to, to explore the full potential of prime editing technology. And so that's really like what my challenge is, right? Trying to develop these programs faster so that we can bring them to patients.
Derek, would love your thoughts as well.
Yeah, listen, it's funny because I'm listening to Sumit and Ann. I tend to agree with allo and allogeneic platform. I mean, I think that's an area where the industry struggled a little bit, but I think from our perspective, we see a huge opportunity. And I kind of feel like we're on the cusp where people are starting to pick that up again. They're starting to pick up in terms of the level of interest. And I know, our company is really excited about our approach in terms of LNP delivery and how we can do that in a very, impactful way. So I would say that's one thing. And then, to kind of give props to Intellia, I mean, just looking at how our assets continue to progress in the clinic. I mean, I think, seeing how our 2002 and 2001 assets continue to progress and seeing that durability. I was in a meeting earlier today, we were talking about how we're up to 3 years of durability in some of our patients. So, just kind of continue to see that play out is personally for me extremely exciting.
Yep. Bob, hearing about a lot of new innovative technologies, but what about good old-fashioned AAV? Is there any innovation in AAV technology that you're looking forward to?
It's kind of interesting that I actually used the word classic gene therapy when I had a conversation yesterday, and someone said classic, like, dude, you're old, like, move on. But I actually think, and I know that there's a separate panel this afternoon about novel AAVs. I think if you look at the natural serotypes and the way that they've evolved over time, and how they have, through its own nature, evolved this unique bio distribution and trophism, and the ability to improve upon that, I think some of the companies that are working in this space are kind of at an inflection point where they're going to find some really interesting new capsids that will, I think, surmount some of the challenges that we've had, particularly with biodistribution. And I know that we have a collaboration with Voyager for some of their novel blood-brain barrier penetrant capsids, which are, frankly, when I saw the first non-human primate data, I literally fell off my chair. I was like, this is just amazing. No one really expected that you could do this, and that's just one example. I know a lot of other groups are working in this space, both in the biotech sector as well as in the academic community. So I think there is an opportunity that we will find new and improved AAVs that surmount some of the obstacles that it currently has. You won't be able to maybe change, the cargo capacity, but you may be able to change the trophism and maybe even some of the immunogenicity challenges that would enable redosing, as an example. So I think there's hope there, but I also think there's a lot of really exciting science in terms of LNPs, being able to target them, having them much more specific for unique cell types. And, there's also some other really cool, like non-biotech stuff that we're looking at, using different mechanical and energy tools, using focused ultrasound as an example to help permeate the blood-brain barrier for a very short period of time to enable broad distribution of a AAV or an LNP within the CNS. So, there's kind of a confluence of technologies out there, and I just think because there's a need, we will find solutions. Where they come from may be a little bit out of the box, and some of the work in LNPs with material science experts, is really remarkable too. I stumbled across a group in one of the universities in Pennsylvania that are using carbon fiber rods, almost like a little, carbon carrier that you can encapsulate nucleic acids. You could coat them with nucleic acids. They're inert, they're non-immunogenic. You can deliver them locally, you can deliver them systemically. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. So I think, it's just an interesting evolution of the space that we did AAV because it was there and it was relatively safe and the early prototypes worked. But now I think, we're kind of in, I forget what the semiconductor field, they call it Moore's Law. Yeah. I think we're kind of on that trajectory.
And it could be that there's no one delivery approach, right? I mean, right. There's, to your point, there's multiple tools that you need to pull on depending on what you're trying to solve. So,
And pulling on that thread, Phil, what about non-viral delivery methods? I think we made a significant headway there. Do you think that's poised for a big leap forward next year?
Yeah, as we move to more prevalent diseases, I definitely see non-viral methods, whether it be lipid nanoparticles or just some really interesting other encapsulation methods, moving in that area. But I think one of the things that really does is it moves us sort of out of that rare disease because of, as Bob mentioned, the capsid requirements, payload requirements. We can potentially get to bigger payload requirements. It also moves us a little bit more into metabolic disease and away from neurodegenerative ophthalmology, because a lot of these would be metabolized by the liver. So yeah, definitely.
I want to shift our attention to the markets and the investor confidence. Obviously, 2023, the markets have definitely influenced the investor confidence in 2023, and we're in a new normal going forward, and how long that lasts, no one has a crystal ball. And I know it's a topic that we've all talked about ad nauseum, but I think it's a topic that we need to continue to focus on, because we all need to figure out ways to work in this new normal. So Derek and Ann, as part of two incredibly successful companies that have weathered the storm handsomely, would love to get your opinion on how you weathered the storm, and has your strategy shifted at all during this time? So, Derek.
Yeah, so maybe a couple of things. First of all, and what I'm going to say is inconsistent in a way, but you do have to focus, right? There's only so much that you can do, so you really have to make sure you're placing the right bets, and we at Intellia spent a lot of time talking about that. The second is, and this is the inconsistency, you do have to keep investing, because it's really important to advance the science. Patients are waiting. We have competition here, right? So we've got to keep things moving forward. So I think, that's the second piece. The third is, we just have to figure out how to collaborate and work with each other, right? And I think that's a big piece as well, too, in terms of how you weather the storm. But, the focus is important. Listen, we're a company that we're doing research. We have partnerships, and we will try to our best to monetize our platform to the extent we can. But we just have to be careful and look at every dollar that we spend and preserve it. And I think many of us are in that environment. Probably not Pfizer as much, although you have a P&L that you're looking at quite often. But, we have to focus. But again, I think we also have to keep the science moving forward, which is very important as well. And that's really a big part of what we're trying to figure out to do while we focus at the same time. So it's really just making sure that we make the right bets.
And with so many products in your pipeline, how do you stay focused?
Yeah, I think, one of the differences between Intellia and Prime is that, just the age of the company, right? I think your company's probably, the technology's been around for 10 years. Our technology was really introduced, the first paper was published in Nature in November 2019. And so we see this great opportunity. What I'm focused on is really making sure that we can establish these modular manufacturing platforms that will allow us to, use, let's say, an electroporation platform, an LNP platform, and then an AAV platform. Once we have those, I know that whatever program comes along, we can introduce it. The first program in each of these modalities takes the most amount of work. I've been in the industry for a long time, worked on many different types of products, small molecules, large molecules, vaccines, cell therapies, and now we have that whole mix. So I think that's really an important thing to keep in mind. I think, we really feel compelled to our mission, which is to bring the full promise of prime editing to patients. And so, for the first part, we are focused on making progress with our 18 programs. They can be bucketed into different modalities. And then I guess the second part of the strategy I would describe is that we clearly understand that we can't bring all 18 programs into the clinic. And so we fully expect to partner some of them. And in fact, what I want to be able to do, and I know our research and preclinical teams wants to be able to get these programs into a really good state so that they can be partnered effectively, so that our learnings can go and bring these programs to the clinic. And then finally, because we're just really pretty young, I would say, we need to be able to still invest in Andrew Anzalone's innovation team. It's not that big of a team. It's a small team, but what that team can really do and explore and fulfill that promise, I mean, it's so exciting. I mean, that's, I think, the thing that I just love so much about it.
Sumit, you're kind of in a little bit of a different place as you're coming up towards a approval next year. How has that impacted what Iovance has done this year?
Yeah, I think Derek and Ann have touched on the foundations of it, is focus. I would say focus on first time right. While there are many programs out there, we have to get to that critical few that can weather the storm, so to speak. To me, that's going to be critical. There's many monotherapies and many aspects we would like to solve. Of course, from a patient characteristic and just getting everyone what they're looking for is a key focus as innovators. But ultimately, just given where the investor community is, I think that focus to the critical few that can possibly get us to the right results through this storm would be very beneficial. Secondly, Anshul, to me, as I think about this collaboration point that Derek made, is that's where the total spend can be reduced. If you think of the financial burden when we're trying to do all this ourselves, it's significant, because if you're taking just a look at biotech and the spend that's accumulating for getting such significant clinical trials done, I think that's another opportunity where, especially with university collaborations, we can see that benefit going right to the patient care and reducing that cost burden, which makes it more of an attractive investment, because it's not like it's gone down to zero. That's one key point,
Sure.
right? Even this weekend, we've seen an acquisition that took place with a local San Diego company. So I'm convinced if we are more focused, as both my colleagues have said, and looking for the right results, investors will respond very favorably.
Bob, from a pharma perspective, how does the market continue to define your current and future cell and gene therapy strategy?
Yeah, I think the challenge, particularly as we're on the verge of potentially commercializing our late-stage pipeline, we're really, quite frankly, we're concerned about the healthcare systems. Things are complicated here in the U.S. It's far more complicated in other regions of the world, and a lot of the healthcare systems have a negative innovation bias in the way that they evaluate and value, the innovations that our sector is developing. So I think, one of the great benefits of being part of the ARM community is some of these challenges no individual company is going to be able to overcome. They're really sector issues, and I think we need to think about, how we communicate not just with the healthcare systems and how they evaluate not just the regulatory aspects, but now really the value of what we're bringing to patients. And in some instances, it's going to be a real tough slog. Even when you get a regulatory approval in some markets in Europe, you don't get pricing approval for a year after your regulatory approval. You think about what the burden that is on, small and mid-sized companies that don't have a balance sheet like we do, fortunately, at Pfizer. Like, we can absorb that financial hit,
Sure.
but it's going to put a tremendous financial strain on, capital-intensive companies, and we need to really think through how do we change that paradigm to be much more efficient, principally for the benefit of patients, but also for, quite frankly, the sustainability of the sector. These are not going to be easy challenges to overcome by any individual company. We really need to do it collectively.
Phil, moving to you, with so many approvals on the horizon, how do you see the pricing and reimbursement landscape evolving this year, and how do you think that will shift investor confidence?
Thanks for teeing me up, Bob. I think what we've seen historically, especially with gene therapies, has been, because they've been for rare diseases, a lot of payers, health technology appraisal organizations have been very focused on cost effectiveness. And most of these products are cost effective. I think that what we're starting to see now, and it'll probably grow to a crescendo in a couple of years, is the concern about budget impact and the affordability. And so as we move more into more prevalent diseases, which we are going into, you'll start to see people just not looking at, is this cost effective, but can I afford it? And how much am I outlaying in the beginning. We're starting to see that, especially in the US. We're seeing organizations like Express Scripts, Cigna, Accredo creating a program, Embark, which is a carve-out for self-funded employers, where that gets carved out of, let's say, United's program, Gene Therapies, 99 cents a month per member per month. They'll make the decisions on what happens to gene therapies. And so that sort of PBM-like type of environment's coming. We don't know how that's going to impact. We don't know how rigid they're going to be, but that's one thing. We see it in Germany with GBA, with their sort of time-limited approval. They'll approve it at a certain price. They'll come back 1 or 2 years later and say, we reevaluated. That happened with Limeldy and Luxturna and a couple of other products. So these types of mechanisms are being put in place. And I think how we overcome these mechanisms is, as Tim was showing, starting to develop the evidence base to actually get people away from thinking about the sticker price and more towards the long-term value. And then in the US, how do you go to a payer that has a 3 or 4 year window and make them understand that this is sort of, it's going to still benefit them. I can think of one payer, I won't mention it, when Zolgensma came out, that actually built a model to figure out how long they needed to keep that member in their plan to recoup the money.
Last point on this topic, in terms of creating more momentum, creating more investor confidence. I think we touched on collaborations and partnerships, touched on the importance of organizations like ARM. What else can we do as a community to create more confidence and create more positive momentum in 2024? Derek?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we need to set high standards ourselves. And, I think one of the things that's really important is all of us, I think, in this room and on this panel, as we, submit regulatory submissions, as we, submit clinical data, we need to have high standards. And I think that's something that we take very seriously, at Intellia. So I would say our standards need to be extremely high, because if, there's a bad actor, it's going to reflect poorly on all of us. So I would say that's one thing. The second, and I made this point last year, is I think we need to engage with regulators and educate them. It's a new modality, it's a new field, and things are constantly evolving. So I think we need to be a part of the conversation. Certainly, props to ARM for being a part of that. But I think not only ARM, but all of us in our own organizations need to do that as well too. So those would be the two high-level comments that I would make in that regards.
Bob, would love your thoughts here as well. As being, I think certainly being in the class of 2024 helps that confidence. But what else can we do as a community?
I mean, I think in the, maybe just building off of Derek's comments about the regulatory frameworks, I think that's one area, frankly, that ARM has been quite successful in. Thinking back, 5 or 6 years ago with the creation of the RMAT designation and kind of the evolution of the way that the FDA in particular has become much more collaborative. I think we went through a challenging period because of COVID and the requirements of regulatory agencies to really focus on the vaccines and the therapeutics there. That was a really challenging period, I think, for the sector. But, coming out of it, I think, Peter and his team, and I'm really looking forward to meeting Nicole, hopefully sometime later on today. I think there's a much more constructive and collaborative approach there. I think it probably, with Peter's leadership, I think he's been quite impactful in improving the efficiency of the agency, and the work that Mike and the team at ARM have done to really bridge to Peter with some of the work that we're doing through ARM, changing some of the thinking at the agency. But some of us in the room were at a meeting with Peter last week in Washington, D.C., and he was quite, I would say, bullish about how he can change some of the culture within the FDA, particularly around areas like accelerated approval. And I think, that's an area that kind of regulatory framework is very constructive to our sector, particularly in the rare monogenic diseases, that, different types of endpoints that are maybe not as hard as you otherwise would want, but for the patient populations and the benefit risk trade-offs for these underserved and quite, either early mortality or extreme morbidity, I think, the patient communities really want it. They're willing to take the risk, And now we have a regulatory framework that will be not permissive in terms of lowering the standard, but making more technologies available to these patient populations that otherwise they really don't have a chance. So I think that's constructive.
Yep. Sumit, your thoughts?
Yeah, just maybe to add to Bob's comments, I think for me it's twofold. One is Iovance's journey has been interesting. We've spent a lot of time working with the regulatory bodies from CMC to potency assay to a lot of key topics that are ideally going to help the industry grow going forward. I think some of the after-action reviews and lessons learned need to be shared in collaborative forums like today, so we can probably leapfrog some of the things that people may not anticipate in their journey and make it faster. So ARM, the collaboration with the FDA, Peter Marks's openness to work with them, I think is a good strategy going forward. The other piece is also a bit of patience and realism. You know, as companies, we have hundreds of companies working in cell therapy. FDA is just one institute. And as I think about our own journeys where we are trying to recruit talent, trying to bring people in who understand our processes, work with such innovative technology that we've heard today, there's an element that the FDA is trying to keep up as well. So I think that's where there's a bit of realism that, you know, as much as we want to get these things all cranked up and ready to go, there's an element of just true time that takes to do these things. So to me, that's the area where other organizations can accelerate that learning by just simply having sessions like this, where they're collaborative, where they're able to talk through these things, and that learning curve just increases exponentially.
And what have you seen with your investors at Prime that gives them more hope and confidence for the sector?
Well, I think you're asking, like, what do we need to be able to generate? We need to be able to generate data. We have to be able to generate the data that we know is going to add value. For us, like I said, I mean, focused on bringing CGD program to IND, but then for our liver LNP programs, making sure that we can really generate the data, and we'll be sharing that data soon, you know, for proof of concept, right? And then eye program, same kind of thing. They want to be able to see in vivo. I think one thing that's interesting is, like, when we work on our programs, not all of our, it's actually really hard to be able to go to an NHP, right? Because we're doing a correction. And so, you know, we're not trying to, like, knock out a gene or anything like that. We're doing a specific correction. So we have to make a new guide for an NHP study. So a lot of our studies will first be where we use humanized mice. And so that's really where we can actually show that the product works using the product that's intended for the human. And then, you know, if we need to go to show biodistribution or dose, that's really where we have to kind of come up with a surrogate.
Great. I want to shift our conversation to manufacturing. Obviously, manufacturing is a big part of getting these therapies to the patients that we need, and it's been a major bottleneck for our field, both in terms of the actual effort required to scale up manufacturing, whether it's internally or externally, and the cost required to do manufacturing. Sumit, would love to ask you, as you know, being involved day to day in the manufacturing process, what has been your manufacturing strategy at Iovance, and what's success looking like for you?
Yeah, from my perspective, we always wanted to have a make and partner relationship, not the make versus buy. While we did a lot of analysis, we were very fortunate that at our very early journey, our partnership with CDMOs was in place for the initial elements. But, you know, like anything, you want to control your destiny, so it becomes an aspect of the numbers and the growth and the financials that start influencing outcomes. I remember 5 years ago spending time to determine what the landscape's going to look like 5 years from now. You know, it's not easy just to look at it from a capacity element that's available today. And at that time, just as I mentioned earlier, the number of patients we're trying to treat in this personalized therapy, they're just not facilities out there that can be there. We invested in a 137,000 square foot facility to, you know, service in the thousands of patients, where most of the manufacturing capabilities were in the hundreds. So as I reflect now after 5 years, I think that process of still thinking it as a make and partner decision is still key to it. Our needs have certainly changed at this point. You know, we built a really extraordinary team in Philadelphia to make the product, but as I think about where we're going from a trajectory and also looking at the CAR T landscape, where some situations where the demand was greater than the supply, and in those scenarios, it's impacting their trajectory and launch. We have to be able to use this network to support that opportunistic demand, have the reliability and redundancy part of the overall process, and ultimately think of it from a cost perspective as well. So I've really not changed my mindset on let's make sure we are working with our CDMO partners, making sure we have this network that as we think about just not our current platform of clinical and commercial, but the landscape changing. Bob touched on some of the strategic partnerships that can take place, and Derek touched on the fact that they're thinking broader on how to get this technology even going further. Those partnerships are going to be key to those successes. So to me, that's the element. It's still a very big encouragement to other biotech leaders to focus on make and partnering, not just make it a very centralized in manufacturing or external manufacturing view.
Derek, and have your strategy kind of mimicked what Sumit's saying, or have you had a different approach?
No, listen, it's fairly consistent. I mean, I think one, we have our suppliers that we work with on the manufacturing side, but we've also, we made an announcement last year that we're building out a facility in Waltham. So I think you need to have that portfolio, and obviously I think we all are aware that we don't want to be the company that overbuilds, because we've seen all those stories of companies that, think that they're going to be the world and they build out and things don't happen. So, you have to strike that balance. I think Sumit made an excellent point where it is, to a certain extent, a make versus buy. I think that's with everything, actually. But it's a make versus buy with manufacturing. And listen, I think, in this environment, I wouldn't be surprised, this is just, me off the cuff here, that you may see more, resilience-like deals or deals where people are doing things where it's, a shared partnership between, manufacturing and smaller biotechs, because I think we're in that environment where, potentially, we're looking for capital. I think the other piece here as well too, when you think about manufacturing, it's not just that shared risk, but it's how can you work with someone that actually helps you accelerate? Because, to your point, we're trying to get these products to patients, and so the research is moving very quickly.
Yep.
And how do you ensure that manufacturing doesn't stop you from bringing things forward? So, these are the things that we all need to think about.
And is it too early for you to think about some of these things? I mean, you're a preclinical stage company going into the clinic next year. Are those things on top of mind for you as well?
Yeah, when I think about overall manufacturing strategy, I really think it being CMC, right? So chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, right? So for me, it's really, I'd say my manufacturing strategy is three things. Number one is really making sure we get the right people, right? And when you just think about the breadth of technologies that we're talking about, there's not a single person that literally will have the experience to do all these different things. And so I've got people that have ASO background, I have LNP background, mRNA background, some gene editing, some biologics, some small molecules, right? I mean, analytical, potency assays, but it's not a lot of people in each of these things, but they have to actually have some real experience and then really have that curiosity to learn. And it's actually really exciting to be able to see everybody kind of working together and then learning and sharing there. And then actually any place where we really have a challenge, there's somebody within the organization that actually can answer that. So that's the first one, really making sure that we have the right people. The second one I would say is about the business process, the systems, and also the infrastructure, right? Because CMC is really making sure that you have data. And really where we are in preclinical right now, we're generating data. We're generating data that's going to be used for an IND submission. We're going to be generating data that will ultimately be used hopefully for a BLA submission, right? And so making sure that you actually have the data in places where it's retrievable, it can actually be tracked, and then it can actually be used for leveraging machine learning and statistical analyses. That's really important. And so, and systems actually include even electronic notebooks, templated notebooks, a fit-for-purpose quality management system, LIMS. Even when we go externally, I'm going to need those kinds of capabilities internally, right? And then finally, it's about okay, what do we actually do internally versus externally? That's where I say internally, we're developing the core, the critical assays and the core manufacturing technologies, right? The processes, knowing how to actually understanding those processes, using with our own hands how to actually make some of that material. We'll actually even make some GLP material when necessary, right? But then we're going to go externally for GMP. I don't have the bandwidth right now, let alone, I mean, do we really want to invest that money to go build a manufacturing facility? When we think about all the different modalities, how do I even know which is the right one? But when you go externally and we're finding, a strategic partner or partners, it's not just the actual CDMO. Of course, it is a CDMO, and there I'm actually leveraging their expertise in manufacturing, but also their GMP infrastructure. But it's also the tools the tools vendors and manufacturers, because I have different pieces of unit operation equipment, and you've got to be able to work closely with them. I think one thing that is really important is to really make sure that, it pains me when you talk about manufacturing challenges, manufacturing bottlenecks, but you have to understand what's ultimately going to be needed at licensure, and I've actually lived through that multiple times in my life. But understanding that you have to have transparency. The sponsor's going to be held accountable for making sure that they understand what the manufacturing process and product is. And so, while I think there's lots of really great new technologies, a black box, situation isn't going to really work. Maybe it's going to work in the laboratory, but it's not going to work, when you get to a BLA, let alone an IND.
Bob, does Pfizer have similar challenges as the biotechs here, or your challenge is different?
Yeah, I guess, I kind of grew up in the biopharma and vaccine side of the business, where manufacturing has just been, absolutely critical. So it's kind of in my DNA, no pun intended. But we decided when we started investing that we wanted to have our own captive gene therapy manufacturing capacity and capability. And a lot of the learnings that we've had along the way, and a lot of the expertise that we had beyond just the actual, manufacturing floor operations, analytical methods, process development, the ability to scale. I don't know if it's, it's hard to verify this, but I think we were the first to go to 2,000 liter scale with a triple transfection process, where the kinetics of that reaction are in 20 minutes. How do you do that in a 2,000 liter bioreactor? The engineering challenges on some of these things were just phenomenally solved by our teams, and they are just world class. So it's facilities, it's the capabilities, all of the, to Ann's point, analytical methods, process development scientists, formulation, being able to handle these nucleic acid products at ultra cold temperatures. A lot of these aspects, one little thing goes wrong and you flush a $5 million batch of material down the drain. So it's really risky, but I think the other aspect of manufacturing is, I think the sector could benefit from more standardization. I think that's something that could be done in a pre-competitive way, which would also ease some of the burdens on the regulatory agencies. And I think some of the consortiums, for example, like the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium, where we have Nimble involved in putting together essentially a standard package that any academic group or small biotech, you could basically take this off the shelf and use it to make your AAV vector at high quality with well-validated methods, et cetera. That'll be a step forward for the overall sector. And I think the other aspect is, once you have a facility and you have the personnel and you have the expertise, optimizing that is really important for the long-term sustainability. And that's kind of an area where we are now bringing in our very experienced and long-established Pfizer Center 1 CDMO business to look at the gene therapy space. We don't want to be, a pure CDMO in this area. We want to just have selected partnerships, because in the same facility we'll be manufacturing our pipeline plus our potential customers' pipeline. And that's an area where, even some of the more advanced quality systems and logistical aspects of having that established infrastructure would really benefit us in terms of optimizing our facility, but also benefiting our potential partners there.
Thanks, Bob. Well, I think we can all speak about this topic for hours and hours on end, but I think we're almost out of time. I'd like to ask you guys one final question. Phil, we'll start with you. What are you most excited about in the upcoming year or for your respective company?
I'm going to smush two things together. The first is new technologies like Prime and a lot of stuff that Intellia is doing, because I think it will help us impact the manufacturing of this and the distribution of this to reduce the cost of goods, which will hopefully lead to lower prices, which will allow us to more seamlessly go into non-rare disease. And so that the ultimate end goal for me is moving into a world where we can affect more people with the amazing advances in the technologies.
Derek?
My next? Okay. Well, delivery. I mean, we just announced a deal with Regeneron, and I think the whole area of delivery is one that every year we're waiting for that continued next level breakthrough. And I look forward to seeing more there because I feel like, we have the tools, I think, and we can make a difference in different tissues. It's getting there. And so to me, it's seeing that continue evolution and delivery and, hopefully some company announcing that they have some, really exciting data. It could be us, hopefully, but, seeing that evolution, I think would be really exciting.
And what are you excited about?
We're transitioning to become a clinical company, so I think that's really the thing that's really exciting for me. For me, that CGD program, it's a very, very small, rare disease, and so, it's not going to be able to treat that many patients, right? It's a small patient population. However, what I see is that, like, when we use that particular manufacturing modality or the manufacturing platform, the modular manufacturing platform, I can really replace just the guides and literally, introduce new programs. And then the other thing is just if you think about it, we, have a deal with this company Simio that's got a monoclonal antibody shielding anti-CD117. And basically for HSC cells, for example, you can do an appropriate gene edit, and then, that would make those cells resistant to getting killed by the antibody. And so you can think about, like, using that to really improve, bone marrow, like, non-toxic bone marrow, non-toxic transplants. And then you can even think one step after that, which is where you can then do this all in vivo. And so you just think through, like, just one little technology, it unlocks another one, and then another one, and then a lot more. And that's just one of our modalities, right? So, yeah. And then, when I look at the field, just like what Tim was saying, there's going to be, 9, 10 different cell and gene therapy programs. So that's going to just be exciting.
Well, Bob, Sumit, class of 2024, there's a lot to be excited about from your end. What are you most excited about?
Well, I'm excited to see how excited Ann is about all these new technologies. No, I think the key thing for me is I would really like to see the class of 2023 be successful commercially. I think that would really help the sector overall. I think it would help change some of the sentiment within the investor community. And, a lot of patients will be helped. So I think a little bit of success builds on success. And I think, we're kind of I describe it as we're kind of at an inflection point where so much exciting good science and really exciting clinical results are coming. And we just need to translate that into commercial success. And, if that happens, then I think the sector will really succeed.
Last but not least, Sumit?
Anshul, for me, it's all approvals. I'd like to see, obviously, Iovance get its approval for its first BLA product, but also for the entire industry. I think to the points Bob and others have made, it's going to help us boost the entire industry. So I think for my colleagues and also for cell therapy at large, we would like to see a lot more approvals. From Iovance's side, I think there's also the excitement around Iovance, which is bringing it to frontline for our patients. So I'd like to see that really mature in 2024.
Well, thank you everybody for listening, and thank you for hosting this discussion.